Hey, folks, welcome back to the show. Today's episode is with a dear friend of mine who's probably the smartest person I know. And I have to say, I know a lot of smart people, given the business that I'm in, but this guy kind of beats them all. But before I talk about him, a little bit of housekeeping to do. Number one, thanking you for being here in the first place and reminding you that if you get value from this episode, please share it with your friends in your networks. Reminding you that to connect with me, you can find me on Mighty Networks in my private membership group, the BSP community. You can learn about that on my website, natnidham.com. And there are still a couple of spots left for the Women's Longevity and Resilience Retreat this November. So if this even whispers to you, go to my website, natnidham.com, and book yourself a 15-minute call with me to figure out if this is right for you. And now, without another second delay, let's jump into the episode. Hey, folks, just a quick reminder that all of the information presented in this podcast is for information purposes only. No medical advice, no diagnosing, no treatments suggested here. Before you try anything that you hear about or learn about here, make sure that you check with your medical provider. Welcome, Ian Mitchell, to the Biohacking Superhuman Performance Podcast, live and in living color. Guys, can you believe this?
Ooh, happy to be back.
Happy to have you back. When's the last time we recorded? It's got to be 2 years ago.
It was about 2 years ago.
Yeah, forever ago. Anyway, guys, we're here today. Hi. We're going to be talking about so many things. I don't even know what we're going to be talking about.
Coming to you live from sunny Austin, Texas.
And dig the backdrop, right? Isn't that nice? Anyway, so we're going to start with Carbon60.
Yes.
Because
I'm kind of the Carbon60 guy.
You're the guy. He's the guy. If you want to know about Carbon60, this is the man you want to talk to. And he does amazing things with those little bucky balls, which is where we'll go after we talk about the basics of Carbon60. So, Mr. Wizard Sciences, I also want you guys to notice the t-shirt. Safety third. Yeah. This from the person who blew up the lab. And more importantly, live to tell the tale.
Yeah. It's kind of a running joke. That's why we have these at the lab.
See, look, there's a blow up thing right there.
Yeah, I actually blew up the lab. In the process of figuring out how to stabilize hydrogen and oxygen in water,
So does that mean there's a drink coming?
Yes, there is a drink coming. Yeah, actually, okay, so I'll nerd out for a second on that. So the first one that's going to be released is we've just been kind of calling it Wizard Water is what we're calling it right now. I'm sure
W squared for the rest of us nerds.
I'm sure there will be a new name at some point, but basically the idea was to take oxygen, which normally is only 8 parts per million in water, and to hyper-oxygenate the water. So we take it up to about 100 parts per million. So, and there are a couple of other waters like Ophora and Cocoon, and they're legit. I mean, they're 32-ish parts per million. So it's a good boost. And when you drink it, you feel refreshed and vibrant because basically you're providing
extra oxygen.
Yeah, insta fuel to your, to your electron transport chain so you can bump up your ATP. So this is kind of the same thing, but it really kicks it up. And it's if you're winded, and I'm winded a lot, like post-COVID, I've had, myocarditis. So I'm a little bit like panting sometimes. So if I get super winded, if I'm working out and I'm doing something and I'm just feeling exhausted, pop the top, down it, gone. And it's a strange feeling.
It's the super oxygenated water, not the hydrogen water.
Yeah, this is the hyper-oxygenated stuff. Yeah,
and so would that be good water for someone to take? Let's say if they were climbing a big mountain.
Yeah, or if you're in Colorado at elevation, that's 100%. Yeah, like if you go above Boulder and you start getting 6,500, 7,000 feet. Yeah, you want some cans of it. It's worth it, even though the weight is high. Or you could buy the $20 bottle compressed oxygen cylinders and
just suck it up.
Which, incidentally, I actually tried. I was in Boulder a few days ago, and I did that, and night and day difference. Like
really?
It doesn't even compare.
But how long does it last?
20-ish minutes to 45-ish minutes, depending on activity level. So if you're going out and you're doing like wind sprints or something really hardcore athletic, you burn through it pretty quickly.
Okay.
But you feel it. And actually the quick test is you put a pulse oximeter on, and if your pulse ox is say 97, you down it, it goes to 100, or it will drop your heart rate down. So whatever, the body's always looking for the best sort of homeostatic balance.
Right.
So if it is upping your oxygenation, it does that. If it's decreasing the load on your cardiac tissue, it does that, right? So your heart rate drops and your musculature.
Right. So if you have enough oxygen, your your heart doesn't have to pound
exactly
as much.
Yeah, that's right. Because I mean, that's the whole point of your heart racing, is to convey more oxygen throughout the rest of your body, right? So if you suddenly replete with oxygen, no need to pound. And it's honestly, it's a strange feeling, because you can go from the point after working out where you're just winded and your heart's beating, and you drink it and it just goes away, and your heart instantly recognizes it. Yeah, it's
an interesting feeling.
It's a weird feeling, because it was unlike anything I had ever felt. Yeah.
Huh. Okay. All right. So that's super oxygenated water coming down the pipes soon. Then the hydrogen water, which has been stabilized.
Yeah. That was actually that one. That's how I blew up the lab.
It involved an old style pressure cooker, a giant thing of hydrogen at 2,500 psi.
Yeah. It was, and a high-speed mechanical shear at 24,000 RPMs.
Which, by the way, was a modified Vitamix. Do not try this at home, people.
This is not for the faint of heart, nor is it for people who don't have a very large insurance policy. Yeah, I would not recommend this, because it sent shrapnel flying throughout the lab, and literally when I walked over, kind of checking myself to make sure I wasn't destroyed, filled with shrapnel, there was equipment across the lab that literally the gauges had been blown off, because they had been cleaved off with chunks of aluminum flying. And when I was standing in front of the unit thinking, damn, it's blown apart, things were falling on me. I was like, what is going on? And I looked up, and there was a huge hole above me. So the takeaway here is safety third, and don't hang out at the lab with Ian when he's working on stuff. Yeah, that's luckily it was at night. I was by myself. I keep weird hours, so thank God.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, but the good news for the rest of us is there's going to be stabilized hydrogen water, because right now you drop your little tablet in the water and you're chugging, like I'm sitting on the plane drinking this every hour and a half or so, and you're like, I'm trying to inhale it as it's
good stuff.
I
have little H2 tablets, and I'll put them in water and drink them. And I think molecular hydrogen is great. The only problem was before, like anytime it was canned, you have to like pop the top and that's right. I'm shotgunning for health. Yeah,
exactly.
So not the best approach.
Anyway, okay, this is a little bit of insight into how this man's brain works, just a bit. And he does have superpowers, believe me. But
hence wizard sciences. He comes by the name Honestly. So let's talk a little bit about, like, the first thing for me that comes to mind. Well, there's a lot of things that come to mind when somebody says Ian Mitchell, but the thing if there's one thing, if we had to pick one thing, it's C60, which is Carbon60. So, for the people who don't know Carbon60, and there are many people, maybe you can explain to us about Carbon60, how essentially, if memory serves, an industrial lubricant became this incredible way of delivering things to the human body at a cellular level. That's literally it. It's so.
And that makes rats live how much?
Well, the
90% longer.
The guys in Paris got a 90% extension, and then I replicated the experiment and got a 93% extension. So the variation there, I mean, that's such a tight variance.
Bottom line, they live so much longer.
Yeah, I mean, it would actually. Yeah, when I set up a vivarium, and when I set it up, I said like, we'll only have these mice, because they were P53 knockout mice, so they have the tumor suppressor gene extracted, and they were homozygous knockout. So it was like the shortest lived mammalian lifespan that had a very, very well documented mortality curve, right? Because they're cancer mice, right? Yeah.
So for people, if you're not, basically P53 knockout mice grow tumors.
Yeah, they're idiopathically
That's what they do.
Present. They're the unfortunate mice that have the
poor bunnies.
I know, truly. Yeah. So they develop these tumors all over their body, and they die. And you use them to test out different therapeutics. So if you've got a chemotherapeutic and you want to test it, you take a P53 and you administer it, and then look over time and see what the mortality curve is. You look for typically you look with a new compound, you look for a thing called the LD50, which is the lethal dosing for the median percent of the population.
Right.
And so with C60, that was what some of these guys were doing, is, it was a new compound. So they were looking at what the LD50 was in mice. And what they found was, rather than actually kill the mice, the control group that was on water died. Then the next group that had just olive oil, they, for the most part, died. And then the last mice standing were the ones that had C60 bound to olive oil, because normally it's hydrophobic, so you can't get it inside your body really well. But if you bind it to a lipid, you can actually, because it's lipophilic, it'll bind to the fat, and then you can use it and it'll pass through the cell membrane. And when it does that, that's when the magic happens. And that's what nobody was expecting, right? So it's literally Carbon60 is a carbon allotrope, which basically an allotrope is a form of an atom that is combined in a different way. So you've got, diamonds, graphite,
right. So it's a
fullerenes.
different configuration of
same
right.
atomic construct, right? All carbon, but different clusters. So for diamonds, you have it in a tetrahedron. So basically a little pyramidal thing. And this, it's like literally, it's a soccer ball. So technically a truncated icosahedron, but a soccer ball.
It's the coolest looking.
Yeah, and it really is, right? So it looks like a soccer ball. And the reason it was an industrial lubricant is little bitty balls, 1.1 or 1.1 nanometers wide. So like super, super small, but little bitty spheres. So it is the most lubricous thing you can get. And
so just rolls.
Everything just rolls
like
around.
Millions of marbles, like trying to walk on marbles.
It literally, yes, it's trying to walk on nanoscopic marbles. And so you've got, in a kilo of them, you've got just trillions of these little bitty marbles. So you're
getting zero traction.
Right, exactly. So when they were trying to figure out if there were any biological uses, somebody had the brilliant idea of like, hey, wait a second, what if we dissolve this? Because normally you dissolve it in a polar solvent, like, benzene, xylene, toluene, something like that. But you can get it to bind to a lipid. And so somebody had the aha eureka moment, and they bound it to a fat, and then they dosed it in these animals. And then instead of dying like they would have expected, they lived almost twice their normal lifespan. So, and when I read that study, I thought, I don't buy that. That seems like total bullshit. I did, because it's like,
but because it defies imagination, right?
Well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
It's like, you're like, really? I don't know about that. Twice as long. I was like, you know what? Okay, let's try it. So then I got all the equipment and mixed everything up, the centrifuges, and batched everything and did it. And then I got the P53s and did the experiment, and lo and behold, 93% extension in median lifespan. And I thought, wow, okay, that's legit.
Why?
Well,
what's the lubricant doing? I mean,
so what happens is, and there's kind of an interesting NIH paper on this. So what happens is, as it moves into the body, right, it bypasses the cell membrane, moves in, and then there's a thing called a gradient differential. So it's basically a charge.
Yeah.
And so the charge is different. So it moves to the surface of the mitochondria. And when it hits the surface of the mitochondria, it stays there. And so everybody's familiar with antioxidants, right? So this is a super, super, super potent antioxidant. So when you get an oxidative stressor that's coming in, that's going to damage your nuclear DNA or, deplete your electron transport chain efficiency, it knocks that out. And so you end up with this huge, just by virtue of knocking out the oxidative stress load, you end up with, on the low end, what we found was 18%, and on the high end, 58.3% additional ATP production.
Wow. But so now, isn't there a downside to too much of a good thing when it comes to antioxidant? Like 100%. You need some oxidative stress, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, you do. It's like building muscle, right? You need some inflammatory response. So even with this, and with, I make all these products to do different things and modulate different components of biology. But I always tell people, I don't care what it is, cycle it, right? Like everything, because most things, like in this case, you want some sort of hormetic stress. You want an oxidative load on your body. A lot of times, the one that I really dig is ozone. I think ozone is fan-freaking-tastic as a hormetic stressor, because the way I prepped it was I ozonated oil, and would use ozonated oil because you take it and your body thinks it has this huge pro-oxidative end salt. So it marshals all of your mitochondria, and they kick on and they're ready to fight, and you upregulate glutathione and superoxide dismutase, and everything's getting ready for this fight, but then there really isn't actually that much of a threat. So you trick your body into mobilizing because it's a big hormetic response. So I do that, and then I cycle in C60 after that. But again, I usually do like 5 days on, 2 days off.
Okay.
Because or 3 and 1, or sometimes I'll do 2 weeks on, a couple days off, or a month on and a couple days off. Just as long as it's variable, just change it up.
Yeah. So I like that, actually.
Well, the body's brilliant. I mean, it's like the most, like anybody who isn't in awe after paying attention to the body, you're not paying attention, because like if you leave and you're like, whatever, physicality, No, it's miraculous. Like in the most literal sense, you look at it and you're like, oh my God, really?
Well, the way I look at it also is even if you take someone who's super sick,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that they're still drawing breath, the fact that they're still, but you know what I mean? The fact that they still exist means that there's millions upon millions of chemical reactions and processes and amazing things going on, which is not to diminish anybody's illness in any way, but just to say that, like, for that person, it's a miracle. For those of us who are walking around reasonably functional, and in some cases more functional than reasonably functional, it is an awe-inspiring thing.
Truly,
all the
it's
things
funny
going on.
I've had people call me about different therapeutics I've developed that are generally very sick, and they've heard about me through the grapevine or something, and they'll reach out. And I've had people go, well, when is it too late? And my response is, are you still breathing? If you're still breathing, it's not too late. You've got a chance, right? Yeah. Like, I think after the point at which you've stopped breathing and you're in the box and you're in the ground or you've been toasted,
probably it's a little too late.
Yeah, the cards have been dealt.
Yeah.
But prior to that, I mean, it's still a miracle in motion.
So there's a metaphysical piece to you.
Yeah. I would be inclined to say there's a metaphysical piece to everyone. On that note, my dad, who I was just talking to about an hour ago, really brilliant guy, but he's in very failing health at the moment. And he said, son, I think I saw a t-shirt today that summed up 4,000 years of esoteric and metaphysical quandaries. It just said future ghost.
And he has a sense of humor.
Yeah, and he's ordering the t-shirt.
And he's ordering the t-shirt. Nice. Well, I mean, I think any one of us could be wearing that t-shirt.
Yeah, I think
maybe
that's true.
For some people it's more imminent than others. But anyway, I'm sorry to hear your dad's unwell. So no, but I mean, like, you're the guy who face plants in the concrete at 65 miles an hour and you
recently
and you heal so fast and so dramatically. It's a little bit like getting passed by a car that's so fast that you don't see it, because the medical professionals you were dealing with, they almost, because they couldn't explain it so much, they ignored it.
Yeah,
they kind of went, yeah, okay, whatever. Maybe the X-ray was wrong. Maybe his femur wasn't really in his tibia, and there was something wrong with the machine that day, because he shouldn't be standing here after how long?
Well, it was pretty fast. Yeah, it was very fast, actually. So just a few weeks in. So yeah. And it was, I think the orthopedic surgeon, who was very flummoxed by what he was seeing on the scans, he literally looked at me and he goes, I guess you are smarter than the average bear. So,
not that one would associate necessarily brains with, magically healing bones.
Yeah, well, that is.
So what did you, you don't have to give away any trade secrets, but
no,
you said to me, like, you threw the kitchen sink at this thing.
I did everything. So I, of course, had my baseline of all the C60 stuff to upregulate mitochondrial function. Then I used V cells, very small embryonic like stem cells. I did 7 rounds of those in 6 weeks. In my lab, and then pulsed electromagnetic fields. I used a Pulse Center's PIMF coil. Yeah, and
that's the mama,
the big Mac Daddy. And I would alternate. I would do 45 minutes to an hour on my femur, and then on my shoulder. So my collarbone was split in 2 instantly when I went down, and then my femur, where it actually went into my tibia, it punched down. It's called a lateral tibial plateau fracture. So it punched down 1 inch or so into the top of the tibia, so the femoral condyle crunched in through the tibial condyle and split it like a log straight down 6 inches.
So for those of you who are not up on your anatomy, your femur is the biggest bone in your body, and that's the thigh bone. And the tibia is the shin bone, which is not the biggest bone in your body.
No, it's not. And it's not nearly as robust or tough as the femur, as I found out. So when I skidded to a halt really rapidly after having the motorcycle roll on me a couple times, I did kind of my systems check. And when I got to my left leg, my leg went straight down, and then the bottom of my leg at the knee kicked over at the wrong angle. That should not be the way that a human is drawn. Like, if you're drawing a stick figure, you don't draw the leg like that. So
no. And what's amazing is you don't freak out.
No, actually,
That is
I
amazing.
didn't.
Like
I
you
didn't
neither
freak out.
passed out nor freaked out,
Yeah, I was.
which is the metaphysical part of you that I was kind of
That
referring
actually
to.
is the metaphysical part. But what was interesting, the funniest part of all of that was when my face went down. I literally remember thinking, "Oh, this is an interesting perspective."
You're like that scientist who had the stroke and did the TED talk
I
about
actually,
it.
yes, I thought about her when all this was going on because it was such a ridiculously strange perspective, right? Because things shift into slow-mo and you actually see what's going on. So as I was coming face down, I thought, oh, that's different. And then when I hit, I was like, wow, this is a really different perspective. And, and then, bike rolls over on me a couple times and ragdolled me a bit. So it was, and it was brutal. But when I stopped, I was face up, and the first thing I did when I actually stopped was okay, systems check, and then I rocked my head and thought, neck not snapped, fantastic, great, which honestly I'm incredibly happy about because that would have been
a bit of a game changer.
It would have been hard to come back from that. So I mean, I would have, and I probably would have done it in the same timeline, but it would have been that one's more difficult because it was not being mobile at all because my collarbone was in two pieces and my leg was completely askew at the wrong angle. Not being able to move at first was difficult, and that I was surprised actually that all of the things just about being ambulatory that you take for granted when you can't move. Oh, snap.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's a big game changer, right? It gives you a whole different perspective on it. I'm like, wow, all of the things that I took for granted.
Yeah. And it's amazing what you take for granted, like scratching your nose.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
or rolling over. Yeah. Rolling over in bed.
I remember this when I had my son, I had a C-section and
sitting up, can't sit up. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Like nothing, right? Like lifting your arm up, talking with your hands hurts. Like it is incredible. And you're right. It gives you if you are willing to acknowledge it, it gives you a different appreciation for the freedom that we enjoy.
Yeah. Well, and actually the thing that was the most interesting to me in retrospect, looking back at the whole thing, and the thing that I was the most pleased about with everything, two things. One, there were lots of times where I was very, very much in tears.
Mm-hmm.
But it was because there was such an outpouring of just like love and support. It was the kindness that I received was overwhelming. Like it was hard to process because it was so beautiful. And then the other thing was I never felt despondent. I didn't feel upset. I didn't feel angry. I was just kind of, and I was kind of surprised, kind of looking at how things were moving. I was like, wow, this is good. I feel like I must be in a slightly different state than I would have been in. Because if this had happened, 3-4 years ago, oh my God, I would have been a basket case.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Yeah. Now I was just like, oh, okay. This is, these are the cards that have been dealt. Great. Oh,
now what are we going to do about it?
Well, and I actually thought this is kind of fantastic because I'm supposed to be, one of the like eminent biohacker guys. So proof is in the pudding, right? Can I recover from this faster than possible? Can I get back to my normal basis really rapidly? And can I do, walk the walk, right? And so I did, for the first couple of weeks. Our friend Todd Shipman, who I work with, we had a call like 11 days after the accident, and I was on the call, and I remember his response because I was sitting up in the lab and I was at a desk, and he goes, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "Why are you on the call? You're on what are you doing?" And I was like, "We had a call." It's like,
11 days ago, you were a bag of broken toys, which presumably you still are because it's only 11 days.
Yeah, and I still was. I mean, my collarbone I had already threaded back together, and it was mending pretty rapidly. But yeah, my tibia was still, it had a big fat hole punched in it, and it was offset. So that was
okay. So let's get back to Carbon60 for a second and talk about the role that Carbon60 plays in this healing. Is it purely at the mitochondrial level because it gives so much energy to the mitochondria that then the body at a cellular level has the energy to do the repair work it needs to do? Is it that simple?
It is that simple. Yeah, it upregulates everything so profoundly. The other component that's kind of additive with that is once those things are spent, they're detoxifying, right? Because it's nanoscopic carbon. So carbon binds to toxins and removes them from your system. So aside from, think of it like nanoscopic activated charcoal, right?
Right.
So you end up with preponderance of this stuff all over your body. And when there are little things in your bloodstream that shouldn't be there, that are bad or nasty, it just binds to it.
So how does it identify the bad or nasty versus the, I don't know, something good? How does it, is it a charge thing?
It's a charge thing, but it actually, and this is one of those things. So I work with Lila Quantum, right? Yeah. And I'm the chief science advisor for Lila Quantum. And we just got this data, and I think it was published on a website earlier this week, actually. And I'll show you the data. It's really kind of remarkable. But what we did is the guys were in Switzerland, and they were remotely charging a set of cells that we had plated, and we had done 2 different types of cell media at the university where I used to teach. So it was a biochem professor there, and I was blinding the experiment, right? So nobody knew. The guys in Switzerland didn't know, and the biochem professor who was plating everything didn't know which cells were which. So I was the only one with the key and to know which set of cells were which. But I took pictures of 2 of the cells, and so 96 well plates, and they're filled with all these little cells. And we did this in quadruplicate. And I took pictures of the 2 that I wanted charged and sent them to the guys in Switzerland. And then we plated them, and we put them in a cell plate reader. And so it's a luminometer, basically. So it reads, put a thing called cell titer glow on it. It has a reaction if there's ATP production, and you measure how much ATP is coming off. So what we found was, within 5 minutes, the ATP production on the charge cells, only on the charge cells, keep in mind, in quadruplicate. So it's not like there was an error, and we had done this 3 times because I wanted to be absolutely certain that we eliminated all the variables that could have thrown us. It jumped 20% at the low end and about 26-ish% at the high end.
So back up. What's happening right here? You're now in a lab. You've got cell cultures in little plates that you can see through a microscope.
Right.
Dudes are in Switzerland. What are they doing?
Quantum charging it. So this is to your question about, is it just ionic?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where science is right now, right? And what I always used to tell my students was, science is a point on a line, right? The best science that we have now, 1,000 years from now, people will typically look at and go, that's laughable. Right. Like, I mean, if you look back at the best science 1,000 years ago, we're like, oh, really? Your leg was wet, so you amputated. Right. Okay.
Those lesions. I don't even think it was 1,000 years ago. Honestly.
Actually,
100 years ago.
Yeah, that's true. But that's the thing is, so I know that really in the future, things will be radically different. So when you ask the question of, is it solely ionic? No, I don't think so. One of the topics that I lecture about a lot is quantum biology, because people's perception of olfaction and gustation, right? Smell and taste. For the longest time, everybody just thought it was, binding and ligand binding and proteins and lock and key mechanism and all this stuff. Like, oh, your receptors are picking this up. Nah, it doesn't appear that way. And there was some really compelling data that showed that isn't actually the case, where they took deuterated compounds, so just heavy hydrogen, so proton, electron with a neutron, as opposed to just proton and electron. So from the atomic level, it looks like the same thing, binds the same way, but it has twice the mass. Mm-hmm. But because it has more mass, it vibrates differently. Right. And the insects that were bred to pick up one or the other could distinguish. So even though atomically it looks the same, or molecularly,
this is deuterium we're talking about. Okay.
Even though it would look the same as a molecule from the outside, right? Like, you can't really tell the difference between H2O and if one is a deuterium, tacked to an oxygen. But the insects could actually tell a difference. They could smell the difference, right? And that makes you go, well, how do you smell it if they're exactly the same from the molecular standpoint? Well, because they're vibrationally different.
Right.
And so that's what that experiment. There's a book called Life on the Edge about quantum biology that is one of my required books for reading for students. And it's there because it kind of breaks the paradigm and says, like, look, this is what we're taught. This is where we're at. This is what definitely happens, sort of. But you can look at a system, and this is why I always bitch about the periodic table of the elements. Does it work? Sure, but in a lot of ways, it's like grouping flowers by color. I mean, they're really like, oh, well, they're the same. This rose is obviously the same as this tulip because they're both pink. That's not really exactly right. Red rose be more like the yellow rose instead of, and that's the thing. So we're doing the best with what we've got. But when you see an experiment that's completely anomalous, it's incumbent upon you as a legit scientist to go, I don't get that. That doesn't fit, right? Where's the error in what I'm doing? And so when you're looking at different compounds and how they relate, if you really have the system figured out and you understand what's going on, there aren't exceptions, right? If you are like, well, it binds like this, but there's, this list of exceptions. Well, what that tells me is
there's something you're missing.
We're missing something, right?
So back to our plated cells.
Yes, back to our plated cells.
So Switzerland people are doing
quantum charging the cells, right?
How?
So
from there to here.
From there to here, right? So there's like a 6,000 mile difference between. They don't know which are which, but only the cells that I sent them the picture of that they've put in there. They've taken the photo and put it in their handy little device over there.
So they're putting it in the Lila quantum cube?
Well, they're actually,
or do they have something different?
Yeah, well, it's this new system. So there's the quantum upgrade, which is, so the block is basically you actually have a physical block. Like I have them in my lab, I have them in my house, I keep them all over the place and they're really handy. And there's some, the thing I did 2 years ago at the biohacking conference
with the coffee.
Yeah, well, and with because that's just a me thing, but but Todd Shipman, who has a horrible shellfish allergy, right? And I brought him on stage and, derma rolled his arm, put the crab meat in, instant histamine reaction, just like a dermal stamp test. And then I put it in the quantum block and talked about waveform dynamics and what's really happening. And then took it out, derma rolled his other arm and put it on and no reaction. And the video is online and it's kind of funny. But people were like, what? Because it looks more like a magic trick. But what that tells me is, again, the picture is not completely clear, right? Mm-hmm. So what's really happening there is the interaction you're having with something, you think you're having an allergic reaction because of some sort of, binding of this and that. No, that's an outcropping. That's a downstream effect. Like you think of yourself as a physical being, right? I think of myself as a physical being. The reality is we're both collections of vibrating strings of things. We're energy that's coalesced around our consciousness. Mm-hmm. And, my kind of estimation of how this works, and a lot of people, in the sciences sort of make fun of this, is that, people think, oh, you have a brain, your brain has these thoughts, it organizes higher levels of complexity, and then you have an awareness and a consciousness. I think that's entirely wrong.
It's upside down.
It's upside down, right? So the expression of the epiphenomenon is exactly the opposite of that, right? It's, completely diametrically opposed. So you have a consciousness, then the consciousness needs to express. So you coalesce a form around that. And if you approach it from that standpoint, there's all sorts of puzzles you can solve, right? Mm-hmm. There's all sorts of problems you can fix and different things you can do, a la the coffee, right? Because you realize that it's at its most fundamental nature, things aren't really what they appear. It's Einstein said it, and I always laugh about this. He said, reality is an illusion, albeit a persistent one. And the thing is, we really do kind of have a refresh rate. There's millions of times a second you basically recreate yourself. And it's kind of like watching a show once you realize how the movie is made, right? There's all these different little slivers that are put together, but very, very rapidly. So it has the appearance of form. And when you approach it from that standpoint, the quantum bit is you're using frequency modulation at a subtle level. So when you have an allergic reaction to something, waveform dynamics are what's really going on, right? That's the substrate below molecular interaction, right? So it cascades up. So every atom has sort of a waveform, right? It has a frequency that it emits. This fellow named De Broglie came up with a good equation for it in 1924 and got the Nobel Prize for it, actually. And I was doing a project and had to rewrite it because it wasn't complete, right? Mm-hmm. Knowing what I had seen in experiments, I realized, oh, that's cool and it applies, but it's not really a full picture, right? He's saying basically, you've got this atom in this case, and it oscillates at a certain rate and has an emissive frequency. True. However, it's not the only component. He's saying basically all of the energy is confined within this sphere. And that's kind of like saying, I've got a briefcase and I'm going to run down the hallway and I'm going to make a 90-degree turn. That's fine. But if your briefcase is filled with gyroscopes that are all spinning at the same time and you run down the hallway and you try and turn, you're going to get lifted off your feet because there's a lot of things that are happening on the inside at a subtle level that you don't see. And so our science, where we currently are, is we think that it's molecular dynamics, but it's really waveform dynamics that governs that, right? It's the quantum chemistry that kind of aggregates to become the molecular dynamics. So in the case of like the histamine reaction, when you have waveforms that work in accord, that jive with your body, right? those things are additive. They're additive resonant harmonics. You feel good, it works with you. So there's constructive interference. But if you have something that doesn't jive and the waveform is in opposition, it's destructive interference. And so when you get a destructive interference pattern in a waveform, that cascades up and it registers in your physiology as, hey, problem, allergic reaction.
Yeah.
So if you just simply go to the very root of the thing and you address things on a quantum level, 2 levels below the subatomic, then you kind of sand out the rough edges. And in the case of the crab meat that I did on stage with that fellow, is you take out the harmful components of the waveform interaction and you make it so that it jives with that person's physiology.
But you interacted with the waveform of the food, not the waveform of the person. But the waveform of the food doesn't interact that way with other people's waveforms. So wouldn't it made more sense to modify his waveform?
Yeah, but that's a little bit pushy.
No, I know it is, but you know what I mean? Like then would that shellfish have made somebody else allergic? Like, were you, I guess my question is
probably if they had an allergy, it could have. It would have needed to have been tailored specifically for them.
So what you did ultimately is you helped that shellfish waveform to be more compatible with his.
Exactly.
So it's almost like you needed his waveform to be able to execute what you did with the cube.
Yeah. One of the interesting things when you look at, there's an old experiment called the double slit experiment, right? And it's kind of what takes things from a wave to a particle, right? It's a wave particle duality experiment. So they realized that when you would look at a waveform at a certain point, the waveform collapses, but the waveform, once it's observed, it collapses. So there's an interaction between the observer, the observed, and the active observation. You need all 3 components for it to happen. And so if you take out one of those components, it's a different thing altogether. So in order to modify something to work for a person, you kind of need the person.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
Yeah. And again, that's the thing that's kind of cool about this is you can't Google the answers. That's why I like it, is because it's so right on the edge that, a lot of times I'm kind of scratching my head going, what the hell did I just see? How does this work?
Yeah.
And when we actually, even with that ATP experiment, a 20 to 25% jump, was really remarkable. It was actually, I think it was like 26 on the top end, but it was so profound to me. I thought, damn, wow, that's okay. It works exactly like we had hoped it worked. It's just kind of shocking to see it in black and white.
So, yeah. So basically, the guys in Switzerland were able to affect the ATP production of.
Yeah. So it's kind of like the smoking gun of non-local interaction in a biological system. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's the thing, is it's really kind of like, wow. Okay. So all the way back, rolling back before the digression, your question about, do I think it's just interacting with things that are nasty particles based on ionic distribution of things? No, I don't. I think that's a way that it's happening, but it's like saying you walked across a room, was it all just muscular force? Yeah, but there's a lot of other interactions that are at play too.
Okay, so this goes back to the Carbon60 question, the little buckyballs, how they not only are they going to deliver, but then they're going to, on the way out the door, they're going to take the garbage with them.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, in one of the preparations I made, I developed it for cancer, right, as an anti-metastatic. And one of the beautiful parts is it blocks transcription, so everything dies in the S phase of the cell cycle. And it just basically can't replicate. It inhibits replication. And that's how I shunted the metastatic spread. But the cool part is when everything dies, because cancer cells are peculiar, if they can't replicate, they go apoptotic. Like normal cells become zombie cells, they go senescent, and which suck because they do this paracrine signaling thing and they send out a molecular signal and it affects, like if 8% of your cells are damaged and senescent, then it'll cascade and hit maybe 40% of the cells in that tissue or organ system and detrimentally hit them. So you want to wipe those out. Cancer cells, since their whole basic job is like replicate.
Yeah.
If they can't replicate, they go apoptotic and they literally just blow themselves apart.
They fall on their sword.
Right. They fall. Yeah, exactly. Like, I am no longer able to serve. So that's it. The seppuku. Right. So when they do that, the particles that are in there, normally with that much, cancerous cell death really rapidly, which is what the stuff I developed triggers, you'd have a Herxheimer reaction, right?
Right. It's from the waste and the
yeah, because everything suddenly hits your system. You have all this, necrotic debris floating around, unless you've got a ton of nanoscopic carbon bind it to that's renally and hepatically protective, and then it just cycles everything out of you. So
what's up with that formula? Is it being tested, or what's the story with it? Because that's dicey territory you're getting into there.
Yeah, well, that's probably a not ready for primetime player thing.
Yeah.
Because I so far works like a champ, but I don't know that that's a big industry, and
it's a big machine.
Yeah, I don't know that I really want to poke that bear at this particular moment.
It's a big bear.
Somebody asked me a while back at a party, why hasn't somebody solved that issue? And I said, money.
And fear.
Yeah. So, it's sad because that sounds so tinfoil hat. And I actually told somebody that one time before, they were like, you need to stop talking about that. And I said, well, why? And they're like, it's a giant industry and they'll crush you. And I thought, and I literally said, that's so tinfoil hat, man. You can't say that. And they were like, I've been around big business for a long time. And in truth, they were right. I was completely wrong. That's a big industry. You don't want to, cross swords with those guys and tangle with them.
But it does crazy stuff for P53 mice, I'm guessing. Those P53 knockout mice.
Well, interestingly enough, they didn't die from tumors. So they died of old age. Wow. One of them had a tumor. Actually, the very first mouse, I opened it up and did the necropsy on it. And I was kind of flummoxed because I was looking around going, shit, this is a femoral tumor, or rather a femoral hemorrhage. And why did it die of a femoral hemorrhage? And I went through the thing and I thought, I'm not a vet pathologist. This is not my gig. I'm basically just barely making the grade here. So I thought, okay, next one, I'm going to send it off to somebody and get full histology and get a vet pathologist to do this. So I did, and came back and said, old age, no tumors. Well, damn. Okay. So the third one, same thing. Fourth one, same thing. And it kept coming back. There was a problem with the freezing and it was inconclusive, but across the entire cohort, none of them died of tumors. We could barely even find them. Normally, those idiopathic tumors that just present, they're so large that that's what kills the animal. And in this case, they all died of old age, and wow. It was, it was kind of a compelling result.
So what's the next step with something like that?
Well, so interestingly, there was a group that had reached out back in the day and a couple of years back and tried to license those patents from me, who then oddly published a paper about a year ago where they showed that C60 created tumors. And I read the paper, and a lot of people reached out to me and said, hey, this seems like it's triggering tumorigenesis. And I said, well, yeah, because if you read their methods and, the materials and methods section, you can very easily use something that's that much of an antioxidant and turn it into a pro-oxidant if you expose it to oxygen and light and you do it the wrong way, right? My lab is really great. My production facility is pretty awesome. And we've got all kinds of cool stuff. So we do it in the dark and we do it under a vacuum and have all these kind of, protocols set up and constraints in place so that it doesn't end up as a detriment. It's a benefit. But if you don't do it that way, you can very easily skew the results to show oh, look at this, it's horrible. And my particular take on that, not that I would ever think a pharmaceutical company would do something like this, but if you wanted to get people off of the path while you were developing something, a really great way to do it might be to publish some confounding data so that two papers say there are no tumors and one paper says, oh, look, that, it's creating tumors.
That reasonable doubt.
Yeah.
So for Carbon60, so let's talk a little bit about Carbon60,
Sure.
More about Carbon60 now. So you're saying exposure to light and oxygen is a problem. So when we're buying, let's say we buy a supplement that's Carbon60, mm-hmm. Does that mean that it has a very specific shelf life that we have to be careful of? How old? If somebody has a bottle that they opened a year ago, does that mean they shouldn't use it anymore? Or is there something about once it's formulated that protects it?
Interestingly, so you can nix the rancidity effects in oils if you bind it to C60, right? It will block it from becoming rancid because it nixes the oxidation. And so when when an oil typically becomes, there's lipid peroxidation and things like that, so they become rancid. Well, it stops that. So they're usually good for quite a long time. But what I always tell people is if you buy a C60 supplement, and there are a lot of companies that I think are really good. I know a lot of the guys that do this stuff, and some of them are just aces. They're really good scientists and they make good products. And most everybody is kind of on board with, just generally trying to help out. But there are some people who are, kind of fly by night companies that I think are probably like using, C60 with solvents and mixing it in bad ways and doing it in the light and all kinds of stuff. Because like the stuff I get it from a lab where we do a solvent-free extraction method, where it's sublimated and you do it so that there are no solvents being exposed to people. Now, interestingly enough, though, I have to give credit, even if you use solvents, typically it's not actually a bad thing, because the degree of solvents that are still left in that stuff after you've done a double vacuum oven drying process, it's so minuscule that it's well below the threshold of what your body can process through. So I personally, I would prefer no solvents, and that's why I use stuff with no solvents.
In a perfect world.
In a perfect world, but not everybody can afford that. So if somebody's trying to make this stuff on their own dime at home and they don't buy tons of it like I do, then get just good 99.9%. Even if it's solvent extracted, just put it in an oven and bake it, and you can make your own stuff. I would recommend.
I actually would not recommend that. Just
if you're going to do that, you're far better off if you use somebody that's got a legit lab set up where all the controls are in place and it's made. Because my setup, it's taken me quite a few years to amass all of the stuff to do it and do it the right way, and
couple of explosions here. All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So Carbon60, it not only does it deliver and reduce oxidative stress, eliminates it really, it'll also then pick up the trash and remove it from the body. So now you've gone a step further, because the first supplements of Carbon60 were just Carbon60.
Yeah.
You could get it in coconut oil, or you can get it with olive oil. Yeah. That was about it.
It was good.
You've kind of taken things to the next level. Let's talk about that a little bit, because that's where wizard sciences becomes really wizardy.
Yeah. So I started playing with things to see what kind of effects I could sort of max out to get really extreme effects. And so one of the serums I make is, we call it the Olympic serum, and I made it for a bunch of guys who were trying out for the Olympics. And they were pole vaulters, or as I called it, reverse limbo. And so, so the guys that are at that level, right, top tier athletes going out for the Olympics, they're all, elite performers, top, like 0.1% kind of a thing. And so if you can adjust their performance by 1 or 2%, it's a huge thing. It's huge,
it's
right?
It's the difference between winning and losing.
Yeah. And so with these guys, we started, and they didn't really know what to expect. I didn't really know what to expect. But we started getting 13 to 17% jumps. And so one of the measures that we were testing was grip strength. And I'll give you this picture.
Which is a really good thing to have when you're pole vaulting, by the way.
Yeah.
You just don't want to lose your grip 3/4 of the way up. Yeah.
Well, and there's so many subtleties to it. Like, they actually have to rotate when they come up on the top. And those guys, all the guys that were going out for it, they had grip strengths that were about 160 pounds, which is huge. Like, shaking hands with them was like,
a dangerous.
It was like a vice grip. Yeah. Like, I think I did it, and my best shot was like 128, 130, and they were like easily 160 every time. So after they started taking the serum, they hit over 200 every time. And one of the pictures, the one I'll send you, is funny because the guy who was doing it, Alex, he actually cracked the grip strength machine. So it was so far in excess of 200 pounds that it actually split the machine. And what's happening there is, you can trigger a super precipitation. Basically, you can fire all of your muscle fibers. So normally your brain downregulates your muscle firing to like 25 to 30% of your capacity. And in this case, you can bypass that. So there's a lot of athletes who are using it now, because it not only is it protective intracellularly, it allows you to really access, like if you're a trained athlete and you can kind of control how much you're firing, you can really access a lot more performance than you normally would.
Right. So, but it's not just Carbon60. There's a, so it's a potentiator, really,
it's
right?
It's a potentiator, but there are other components in there. So one of the things is nicotinamide mononucleotide, NMN, right?
NMN.
And if you couple NMN, which is an NAD precursor. So you're basically trying to give the electron transport chain all of the components it needs so you can up it. So what I did is I looked at all the different complexes of the ETC and said, okay, I can hit this with this compound, this with this compound, this with this compound. And if I couple them this way, then I can get some synergies. So the performance outcropping to that, normally, like when you look at things in a cell and you're reading it out, you hit it with a cell titer glow and you get your readouts, you're like, oh, okay, cool, it's great. But when I put in a physical system, I'm never going to see this kind of performance. Well, maybe, but that's what I'm actually seeing is, like these huge things where one athlete that I was talking to this week, one of the other guys in the company told me this because he had a conversation with him too. And I thought this was pretty remarkable. He's a professional athlete and was doing powerlifting, and his 1 rep max the day before, he did a mega dosing of the Olympic serum. The next day he was able to do reps. He was able to do his 1 rep max
In
for
reps?
reps. Yeah. In the span of 1 day.
So for those of you who don't spend time in CrossFit gyms or lifting gyms and don't know what we're talking about, 1 rep max is the weight to lift that you could only possibly lift once.
Right.
That's it. And it's like your fingers are going to fall off, or your arms, you think your arms are going to get longer, or they're going to get pulled out of your socket, or whatever the case may be. So from one day to the next, he went from
1 day
from being able to only barely lift this thing to
being able to do reps of 5 to 10. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So and it's because
So
of the
but
way.
what do you so that I'm trying to mechanistically what's going on. So if you're able to recruit more muscle fibers,
Exactly.
then you just have more men on the job.
That's
so
it.
now you can just do more.
Yeah.
And so, but the body limits to 25 to 30%. Why? Is that as a protection mechanism?
It is a protective mechanism. And what I have consistently told people, myself included,
like don't overdo
don't
this.
do it. Right. Like if you can lift 250 pounds, great. Lift 270 pounds. There's a friend of mine who's an MD in New York, Maya Sheetreat. She is kind of a big believer in this because she did the same thing. She had worked up to lifting, I think, 200 pounds and then went in and was able to lift instantly, like right after starting this, 230 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
And so she saw this, was like, what? A 15% gain. And her personal trainer was kind of freaked out. And that was the only thing she had changed, was she started taking the Olympic serum. So she, and she's an MD, she knows what she's doing. That's why she's a real believer in it, is because she firsthand experienced it. And she actually, we were talking a while back, and she said, had I not actually experienced that, I would have thought it was total bullshit. Yeah.
Bullshit.
Yeah. And that's true, because I've had the same experience. But the reason your body does that is because you're keeping some gas in the tank, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because if there's some sort of fight or flight thing that you need to do, you can actually do a lot. Because if you figure normally 25 to 30%, if a car falls on your baby, and
I was about to
say,
say, so that's why people can do those crazy extreme things in that moment.
Yeah, there was a
Is that it's like the gates open
right.
up.
You get
you get full
norepinephrine
access.
and adrenaline, and you're like, superhero suddenly.
But you can't be lifting cars every day.
No, well, there was I think it was a Nat Geo special, and they were talking about human strength, and they were talking about the central governor theory, which is the idea that your brain downregulates everything. And there was a rock climber who had been going up a sheer rock face, and a piece of, I think it was shale, had come off and fallen on him, and he was sliding backwards, about to go off of a 500-foot drop, and it was a 1,200-pound rock, and they knew this because they measured it, because he pushed it off of himself. Like he literally bench pressed.
In that moment.
He sheared both pectoralis muscles. So
in the process.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, can your body do it? Sure. Should it? No. It's
so
fight
then,
or flight.
Okay, so then what's the way to use the Olympic serum? So it gives you this superpower to be able to do way more than you should be able to do too fast. Like before you have the time to build up.
It's a dose-dependent function, right?
Okay.
So if you're not, and the athlete that I was talking about, he was experimenting, and I said, how much were you taking? And it was a kind of a substantial amount. He told the other fellow at the company that he'd taken 4 tablespoons. So that's
and a dose is
2 teaspoons, right? So 10 milliliters versus 60 milliliters.
Right. Okay.
So he 6x'd the dose, and it's a dose-dependent function. So he got this crazy performance. But the best way to use it is, most people are fatigued anyway, right? Most people run through life kind of tired.
Yeah.
Take this and you won't be.
And so you can get to the gym and do your workout. Your 2 teaspoons will allow you.
Oh God, yeah. More than just that. Actually, one of the elite CrossFitters in the country called me after his first day of use, and we have mutual friends, and he called me and said, first question was, is this legal? And I said, yeah, it's legal. And he said, I just ran the fastest, and he was retiring from competition that year. He had turned the ripe old age of 35. And so
Well, having done CrossFit, I get that. I got tired of funding my
Yeah.
chiropractor's kids' university education.
Right. So he was retiring from competitive, athletics that year, and he ran his fastest run time the first day that he took it ever, his fastest run time ever, and put up lifts that he said he hadn't been able to do for 7 years. And so, and that was with, 2 teaspoons. So it's more than enough to power through, to get whatever you want to do done. Personally, I mean, yeah, you can use it at the gym, but I think if you have a lot of extra energy, you're just a better human, right?
So this is about energy.
Yeah.
It's so the Olympic serum is really, because I was going to say this. So this is not just a workout supplement.
No,
this is
it's a get through life.
Get more gas in the tank.
Yeah. Are you feeling fatigued? Take this and you won't, right? And the other thing is really some of the peripheral benefits. If you have inflammatory response in your joints or a lot of autoimmune conditions, your body will fix those things if it has the resources to fix those things. Or let's say for something that you and I are well aware of, let's say you have a bunch of that in your system and you're horribly depleted on, say, iron or something like that.
You don't feel it.
You don't feel it. And you keep motoring along. Even though most people would need a transfusion, you just keep motoring on and you get 4 to 5 hours of sleep a night and you keep rocking it and going at a crazy rate.
But could you not be burning the candle at both? Could it not be giving you, like, you know what I mean? Like, would there not be like, you'd be better off repleting the iron so that you're not.
Oh, yeah. And think about how much more performance you get that way. So the thing is, it's kind of like a safety net. That's how I think of it. I think of it as literally like a biological safety net.
Yeah.
Should you deplete all those other things? Absolutely not. You should make sure that you're, going in, getting good checks and good labs so you know what the hell's going on. Like, and we're talking about me here. Yeah. So the thing is, I probably run a little too hard and a little too fast. And I'm kind of like the cobbler's kid with no shoes, because like I work on a lot of other people and do a lot of other things, but I'm kind of like, I'll get around to myself when I get around to myself, shy of having to repair my leg and my collarbone. I haven't really focused on anything for myself physically, which incidentally is what I was telling you before we started. I'm actually about to start doing this kind of de-aging protocol because I'm legitimately curious to see, with all of the stuff that I've, kind of put together over the past couple of years, and with all of the really brilliant friends that I have who've done little components of this and that, what would happen if I just cobbled it all together? Yeah. Yeah. So, we'll know, right? And
we're going to find out.
We're going to find out.
There'll be another podcast episode about this.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's Olympic. And then
neural. And this one's my favorite, right?
Oh neural my God, RX. The letter you showed me. So, but let's go through the problem first. And then... Okay, so the problem. Okay, so the whole impetus for making this stuff was to figure out how to fix Alzheimer's, right? Okay. And someone, a neurosurgeon, actually wrote me a note and said, hey, we had a mutual friend in common who was also a doctor, and they said, we think you can solve this in 3 weeks, literally. And they said 3 weeks. And I remember at the time I was like, whatever. And I thought it was total BS, and it just didn't register. But then I thought, and it was somebody who was supposed to be very kind of esoterically tapped in and have a lot of knowledge. And I thought, it's 3 weeks. What the hell? I'll give it a shot. I mean, it's just 3 weeks. I can tinker with something for 3 weeks. So I thought, okay, if Alzheimer's is a problem, why does this disease exist? So I kind of went through the pathogenesis, right? And I read a ton of stuff, and I have the benefit of picking up knowledge pretty quickly. So I read a litany of information out there and lots of papers, and it didn't feel quite right. Like the general assessment didn't feel right. And I thought, I think this is right. So I kind of broke it down and came up with, why would nature make this? And what I ended up at was, it's not a disease. It's a protective mechanism. So let's define what this is, because I'm with you, because I know what this is, but it's the plaque.
Yeah.
Right?
So it's the tau. So it's a combination of these things going on where you have tau proteins and amyloid beta plaques. And that's one component. But the other component is a downregulation of neuronal potential, right? So literally the energy drops. And so the other component is there's this little subset system in your body called your glymphatic system.
Yeah, which got discovered not that long
3 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
And so it's what your body uses to purge and clean your brain. So
at night, which is why you need to sleep.
You got to sleep because you have to have it. So what happens is, when I broke this down and I looked at it and said, okay, well, why does this disease exist? Well, sure enough, not a disease. What happens is, in my estimation, your body's bombarded with different things environmentally, right? So you have exogenous threats like glyphosate and heavy metals and toxins in the air and,
Viruses.
yeah, viruses, whatever, right? So those things come in, and when they get kind of in proximate area to your brain, your body goes, oh no, and wraps them in something and packs it away. So you get these little buildup of plaques and proteins. And so that's one component of it, right? And it can also be endogenous stuff. You can have like P. gingivalis in your mouth, and the bacteria there
So this
so
is how
close
the
to your brain.
yeah. So this is interesting, right? So this is that connection to like gum disease and
exactly. It's so
other
proximate that the little bacteria roll right past your blood-brain barrier, but your body, of course, has a protective mechanism. And we've talked about this. You have this thing called your omentum, oementum, which is this kind of lacy band around your midsection that is your body's mechanism for sequestering things that would cause a problem with your blood pH, right? Because if your blood pH shifts, you die.
Yeah.
And so when you get something in that's, too carbohydrate rich, that's going to convert to sugars, that's going to be too acidic, it packs it in little fat packets, and tucks it around your midsection. Hence the very svelte look and athletic appearance of most people in North America, because their diets are perfect. So for those of us who have a bit of a donut, it's because we're eating stuff that's improper, and your body is protecting you, right? It's keeping you alive and just protecting you. It doesn't care what your midsection, the body doesn't care if you have a six pack.
No,
doesn't give a damn.
Don't factor.
Right.
No.
It's about survival. So of course your brain has a similar mechanism. So when it gets some threat, it wraps it and packs it away. And, it keeps those threats held in place. Now, as you age, your body downregulates, right? Your cellular potential drops. You don't have as much energy. Your lymphatic system, which literally uses, it's a kind of like a hydraulic pump, if you will, right? So it uses interstitial fluid and cerebrospinal fluid. It opens up a channel, and it literally pushes it in and washes your brain, and then pulls toxins out, which then go into your lymph system, and then it's excreted. So as you get older, that functions less and less and less and less. And if you get really crummy sleep because you're exposing yourself to lots of blue light late in the night, I don't know, like an iPhone or something, it gets even worse, right? And culturally, we're in a bad spot, right? And so we're going to see over the next couple of decades a lot more of that, I think. But all of these things kind of existing in the same sphere, what I saw was, so the body was trying to protect us, but everybody's being assaulted. So some people, that aren't dying of, cardiac issues, or aren't dying of diabetic issues or whatever, or cancers, their short fuse in the batch is Alzheimer's. And that takes them out of the game, because everybody's getting these assaults, but some people might just be more susceptible to it, whether it's, the environment or genetics, doesn't really matter. They're just more susceptible. And so I thought, okay, well, if that's the problem, still thinking like this, and was in the first week, still thinking, okay, if this is the problem and this is actually the origin of this, system, well, how would I roll it back? So then I broke every one of those components down and figured out what I would use to roll them back individually. And then I put all of that together, and the result was the Neural RX. And, I don't want to make any medical claims, but if you don't have some sort of massive cognitive deficit, it's like rocket fuel for your brain. And it has the benefit of, as a lot of people will say, people use it in ways that I hadn't anticipated. Like a lot of people say it really helps with ADD and ADHD and things like that. But personally, I think that's just because a lot of those systems are deficits because of energetics, right? We're in an environment where we're overtaxed, not sleeping properly. Your energetics are really piss poor. And so because of that, everything falls apart. And if you just simply change that, at the mitochondrial level, and the mitochondrial health goes up and you have more energy, the body wants to balance itself. So it starts to balance itself. But if you do have those extreme cognitive deficits, what I have noticed in multiple cases, quite a few actually, and the numbers is growing, the symptoms roll back.
So it's when you're taking it, though.
It is when you're taking it.
Okay, so what is it about this formula that gets it to the brain? Because Olympic doesn't do this.
No, it doesn't.
I bet you Olympic does help the brain a little bit, but
it does, but just in a peripheral way. Yeah. No. So this, I bound it to a different lipid, right? So I use the body to do the heavy lifting. So the body will take in different fats and allocate them to different places in the body.
Use MCT.
Yeah. So I use pure caprylic, right? So C8, because carbonate is the most active fraction of an MCT. and you don't smell like a goat. C6 Capric. For those chemists, yeah, you'll laugh at that. Goat oil, Capric. So it breaks down, it hits the liver and fractionates and becomes beta hydroxybutyrate and sucks all this stuff up to the brain with it. And then it starts to break it down. And then it has proteolytic enzymes that go in and very gingerly nibble all of the little proteins and plaques. And there was a really good research paper out of Japan that showed that was the case. They could get past the blood-brain barrier with this specific proteolytic enzyme, and it would start to eat the plaques and the proteins. And the benefit there is you don't want to break those things down in one shot, because if your body has wrapped all of those toxins for a reason, you want to take it out in little bitty loads. You don't want to massively dump toxins in your body, which unfortunately is how some therapeutics that may or may not have been recently approved for said conditions actually do it, which is it's like the death knell. It's a horrible approach, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, certainly it's got a lot of people up in arms.
And rightly so.
It is not being universally celebrated.
No, it's kind of like deuterated therapeutics, which is something that I just saw that a lot of companies are starting to move to. I was
with deuterium?
Yeah, with deuterium. I was sent an article yesterday.
I just spent 3 months drinking deuterium depleted water.
Right. Yeah. And it was a new compound that is deuterated. And they were saying that it will protect against oxidative stress, which is it's the logic there is kind of like saying, very few kids are killed in Antarctica on the tundra. So
let's send the kids to the Antarctica on the tundra.
Keep them safe, we're going to put them out on the tundra. I mean, it is literally, it's like, it's some of the most backwards thinking I think I have ever seen. Like whatever scientist came up with that should be run out of town on a rail. Yeah. It's, thalidomide 2.0.
Let's go back to the neural formula.
Yeah. So the neural formula.
Caprylic acid. So that it gets it to the brain.
Right.
It's proteolytic enzymes, which, guys, think of them as like little Pac-Men.
Yeah, literally, very, very literally.
Protein.
Yeah.
And there's something else. There's a couple of other things.
So there's NMN, right? Again, right?
So that
precursor.
Yeah.
And mixed with resveratrol, because you get these kind of interesting effects. So if you take NMN as an NAD precursor, it's really good. But if you link it with resveratrol, it gets about a 50% bump, right?
Okay.
And 52, I think, is what it was actually measured at. So that it's 52% more effective. And if you mix it with ginsenosides, like ginseng derivatives, it's actually 97%.
Ginseng is really good for the brain.
Yeah. So if you take NMN and ginseng, it's actually 97% more than just.
So that's 1 + 1 is 5.
Yeah, that's right? Basically it.
So for resveratrol, and this is funny, doing this in person, like we could sit here and talk for hours, and it's more or less been hours. So
wow.
We're going to have to dial it back, or we're going to have to close soon. But for resveratrol, controversial compound. A lot of people will say, well, it's not bioavailable, which I know you're going to have an answer for. And other people will say, well, pterostilbene would be a better thing to use instead of resveratrol because it's its friendlier, more bioavailable cousin. Why resveratrol? And tell me about this.
I actually think in a perfect world, and I probably will go back and reformulate, I will move to ginsenosides because
just ginsenosides.
Yeah. Because I think there's actually better efficacy and more bioavailability. So, and in truth, it was, I always joke about reinventing the oval, right? Like everybody, when you stumble upon something and you figure something out, a lot of times you're like, oh, look how great I did. It's the perfect form. No, probably not. And in this case, it does the job.
Science. This goes back a little bit to what you said earlier, right?
Yeah.
We know what we know now.
That's it.
But the best scientists, just like the best doctors and the best therapists and the best anything, are people who say, I'm going to keep working. I'm just going to keep making this better because to your point, and anybody's point in this business who kind of gets it, we only know what we know today.
Yeah.
We're going to know something else tomorrow. And we have to be willing to go back and revisit.
Well, and that's why Wizard Sciences exist, right? Yeah. Because I left because the mindset where I was, because I had started a company before this, was to continue doing exactly where I had moved the ball to before. And that's fine. And then just refine it and make more profit and do the same widget over and over. That was not really how my thing was. I wanted to do the best. I want to see what the best human performance I can elicit is. And so to your point, why resveratrol? Because it was readily available. I knew it worked. I had the data. Is it the best thing? No, it's absolutely unequivocally, and I know that, not the best thing.
Okay.
So will I reformulate? Yeah, probably so.
Coming soon.
And actually, it literally we're synthesizing things right now. actually to that end. So that
Funny
was
how that works.
funny how that works.
And
Constantly improving.
And the feedback you've gotten on this formula has been nothing short of jaw-dropping.
It is remarkable. Yeah. And it really is. I mean, like all the, there have been, one of the women sent me a picture. Her son had pandas, which is a neuro disease and for kids, and it's a really bad one, right? He hadn't been able to put his heels down. A lot of the kids walk on their toes, and within, I want to say, she said 3 days, he was back on his heels for the first time in a year and walking around.
Well, because pandas sometimes is brought on by an infection.
Yeah, very frequently. Right. And again, it's whatever stresses your body to the point of breaking, right?
Wow.
You can have all these latencies in your body and, or rather not so much latencies, but a latent infection of some sort, like Epstein-Barr or something.
Which 90% of the population has,
Yeah.
Whether they realize it or not.
Yeah. And
right?
they're just dormant. They're laying in wait, waiting for something to trigger them. It's kind of like when Hashimoto's triggers, right? People get it because of emotional things or physical things or chemical things, right? It can be any one of those triggers. It's whatever pushes the person past the point biologically.
And so the neural formula really has application not just to someone with Alzheimer's.
No, it's everybody should be taking it. Well,
yeah.
The thing is, the reason I would really like it to get out far and wide is because we're all under assault every day. Literally every day, our brains are under assault from all these toxins and environmental things. And actually, sadly, it doesn't stop there, right? The EMFs that we're being exposed to, like anybody who thinks that's, just silly, just keep reading papers, because the voltage gated calcium ion channels, the things that we're exposed to on a daily basis are so much more powerful than what is actually required to affect those in a detrimental way. Everybody's around them all the time. I still use my old school earbuds, and
I do too.
I
refuse to wear earbuds. I literally refuse. Listen, I have a friend who just had a baby. What did they get from me? An EMF blocking blanket and beanie.
Nice. Actually, one of the things with the stuff that we've been doing at Leela is, and we've got data on this, it's on the website, is showing that we can eliminate a lot of the biological stress from EMFs just with quantum charged things. Because it affects. Is
that like the little the pendant, or the thing you have in your pocket?
The thing that I always have in my pocket.
My pendant is at
my
home.
heel capsule.
Yeah. I'm afraid to carry it in my pocket because I'll lose it.
Yeah.
So instead, I left it at home, and I'm traveling for 5 weeks.
Yeah. Well, you can have this one if you want. I have a cube.
It's yours.
So it's interesting. Because we have all the blood work that shows, if you put this in your pocket and you're exposed to EMFs, it will negate the effects.
That's insane.
It is. It defies our conventional understanding of how those waveforms interact. Now, we've got the data that shows we don't know everything. And so, as the science guy there, it's up to me to figure out and suss all this stuff out so I can explain it. Honestly, I don't know that I'm ever going to be able to fully do that. And the reason there is we're big, meaty, tangible critters. And a lot of the stuff that we've shown is having an effect is so very subtle that we don't have ways to measure it.
Well, it's amorphous, right? It doesn't, you can't touch it or feel it.
And it's interactive. One of the stranger experiments I did was I took vitamin C, and I have, the infinity block. And so I took vitamin C out of the same sample at the lab, and we ran it through the spectroscopic equipment. And I looked at the readout on the potential, basically reduction oxidation potential. And so before, 2 samples were identical. After, one was so much more effective and one wasn't. And I thought, okay, then I ran it back through the spec. It's the same compound, but it behaves like an entirely different compound, which gets back.
Stuff you can't see.
It's the stuff you can't see.
Right.
Yeah.
It's the stuff you can't see. So for those of you who don't know what the block is, because this is, Ian's got his finger in many different pies.
Yeah, lots and lots and lots of different
So
pies.
the Leela quantum block, that's a different company. It's a whole other.
Yeah, it's a whole other thing. But the reason I work with them is because what they're doing is impactful. Right?
Yeah.
And where I can help those guys be impactful and it will help other people, I'm 100% on board, because their stuff is really great.
Next level.
Yeah, it is next level. It's truly next level. And, I'm like the token scientist, right? Like I'm the guy, because it's a bunch
just
of
hanging out here. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it seems very woo woo. And there's a lot of people who are, healers and this and that. And but they're legit. I mean, I've seen the data. I have the blood work. It's legit stuff. They just need someone to be able to kind of bridge the gap, that has the vocabulary of science so that you can explain it and say, okay, right, this healing effect. So you're propagating a waveform and it's changing the molecular dynamics here, and that affects the blood work. And here are the pictures. It is actually one of the most compelling things. If anybody goes to, I think it's LilaQ.com and looks at the shots of the effect on red blood cell aggregation, the little coin rolls that form.
I get those.
Yeah.
Rulos.
Yeah, exactly. So if you look at that 5 minutes before exposure to a quantum block and 5 minutes after on dark field microscopy, it's entirely different. So Ben Greenfield is a friend of mine, and he called me when that first came out. The blocks were first being kind of pushed out, and he said, "Hey man, is this legit?" And nobody else had the data. I sent him the blood work, and he went, "Huh, okay." And now a couple of years later, he's like, "Okay, this is absolutely legit." But at first, he had the same. Admittedly, like he had the same sort of reluctance I did, because you hear somebody like,
well, you're like,
"There's this." Like my kids
seriously,
my kids were making fun of it. They were like, "Oh, let me get this right. So you've got this thing, and it's charged with some special vibration, and it's going to protect me physically. So what you're giving me is a magic talisman." And I was like, "Yeah, okay. I get it." Effectively, that's kind of what it sounds like, But it does actually, I mean, being open and being, pretty educated about history, I kind of wonder, like, how much of this stuff did other people figure out?
Well, or stumble upon and not understand, but just at a core level, just say, this makes me feel good.
So one of the weirdest ones like that is there's this old Hindu ritual called a puja, right?
Okay.
And this specific puja was the Agni puja, and Agni was the god of fire. And so what they would do is they would take this thing that was basically, it's a Shiva lingam. It looks kind of like a stone egg, and they would burn charcoal from coconut husks around it, and then they would pour ghee, clarified butter, sacred ghee, so which is butyric acid, short chain fatty acid. They would pour it over, and then it would bind with the coconut, and they would let it sit. And then the deal was you would eat the prasad, the holy food that was product of this coconut charcoal bound to this lipid. And they said that it would give you an extension of lifespan for 2 cycles, which would make you live twice as long.
Carbon60?
Exactly.
Get out.
It's completely serious. And when I first saw it, I was like, damn, that's legit. I mean, that's an actual, but I'm sure all that stuff was lost to antiquity, and people would read that and be like, whatever, that's total malarkey.
Yeah.
But I have the dead rats to prove it, or mice actually. But, that actually was a thing. Somebody at some point had stumbled on it, and sure enough, I guess they did enough Agni pujas that they, somebody lived a really ridiculously long time.
Well, somebody was just addicted to the Agni pujas. Just right. Like, I'm having Agni puja every day.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is you have to wonder, like, well, I always joke about this Far Side cartoon where there are these 2 sharks that are swimming.
This is the last story, by the way, guys. Yeah.
Yeah. There are these 2 sharks swimming side by side, and one is looking up at the other one and goes, "Dude, your dorsal fin's sticking up. How long has that been screwing things up for us?" And I kind of feel like a lot of times in sciences, that's exactly it. It's like, it's this very obvious thing. We're like, oh, cool. It just comes out of left field because it's been there all along. We just hadn't codified it.
Well, and we take, and it's just, that's the way it is.
Yeah.
There's no other way it could possibly be. That's just the way it is.
Yeah.
All right. Ian.
Nat.
I want to keep talking.
Yeah, we should probably wrap.
So why don't we tell people where they can find the wizard stuff? If you guys decide you want to do your own experiments, we didn't talk about coupon codes or discounts or anything. So assuming we come to an agreement on that,
there will be one.
It'll be in the show notes.
Yeah, I will make sure there's one.
And I'll have talked about it in the intro, but
yeah. So just go to wizardsciences.com. And everybody teases me about this, and it takes a while now, but I literally I'm here to help. So if you need anything or need a special consult or something like that, just hit me up. On Instagram, it's at IanMitchell1. Or you can just reach out to the guys at Wizard for support at Wizard Sciences, and
they'll find him.
They'll find me. They know where my desk is. So
amazing.
Yeah.
Ian, such a pleasure.
Yeah, as always. I'm really glad I get to see it.
I am so glad we got this to happen. So thank you so much. And I don't think I'm forgetting anything, because I think we covered a really lot of ground. So thank you. Wizardsciences.com. Ian Mitchell, which Other people might pronounce it Ian, but it's Ian.
Yep. Stronger.
And yeah, no, I much better.
My mom, stronger name, flows better. leave it to the artist from now on.
And I know we'll be doing more episodes because
Yeah.
I know that there's things in the pipeline.
Oh, yeah,
but
and-
not to mention the evolution of
Yeah.
what you're doing now.
Yeah, and that's critical, right? Like I'll definitely be back because as I come up with new things that'll help more, I want everybody to know and have access to it. So
Amazing. Thank you.
you're welcome.